Smoke laced the dawn over Tokyo, streaking the sky with the remnants of a night battered by flames. From battered rooftops and the craters of the battered city, civilians and ground crews squinted upward, watching a drama unfold that would redefine their understanding of power and fate. The air was thick with expectation as the newest legend of war streaked overhead. A crippled P-51 Mustang, its silver skin marred by bullet wounds, propeller spinning like a prayer for survival. Japanese pilots, once kings of these skies, felt a tremor of disbelief. The Mustang, a symbol already infamous among Allied and Axis aviators, had been crippled in earlier combat, leaking oil and struggling to maintain altitude. But as the faster, more agile Japanese fighters closed in, preparing to claim an easy trophy, the Mustang did the unimaginable. It began to climb, higher, faster, defying engine strain. Its battered airframe clawed upward, cutting through the morning haze. It left seasoned aces behind, their best machines, Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate and Mitsubishi J2M Raiden, struggling to match its ascent. The radios crackled. Ground observers called in the miracle with trembling voices, reporting the crippled Mustang as it outclimbed Japan's finest, not once, but twice. The air over Tokyo thrummed with stunned silence and whispered awe. One radio operator choked on his words. "It is impossible. It rises. It rises again." The moment became a prophecy, a harbinger. Every witness sensed that the war had shifted, the old certainties broken in a single, breathless duel above the capital. For Japan, this spectacle was both humiliation and premonition. The Ki-84 had been their pride, the last great hope to reverse an aerial tide. Its designers boasted speed, climb, and maneuver, superior on paper to almost every Allied fighter. Pilots revered the Hayate, nicknaming it Frank, a friend in the sky. But the Mustang's climb, its refusal to fall, shattered these illusions. The Raiden, born for vertical performance, was left trailing by a wounded enemy craft. On the Allied side, tales of the Mustang's miraculous performance traveled fast. Mechanics who had patched up the returning fighter became legends in their own right. American pilots gathered in tents beneath pinned maps, tracing the Mustang's trajectory through the stratosphere with reverent fingers. The engine responsible, Rolls-Royce Merlin transplanted from British excellence, was the heart of this miracle, giving the P-51 brutal climbing ability and unyielding endurance. But that morning it was more than engineering. Something raw and desperate pulsed through the battered craft. Captain Saito of the Imperial Japanese Navy watched from his cockpit as his wingmen strained their engines to climb with the Mustang. "Twice," he would write, "the crippled Mustang rose above us, carrying our hopes with it into a realm we could not follow." The encounter infected command bunkers with dread. Staff officers were forced to confront what their engineers had reluctantly admitted. The Mustang's blend of range, altitude, and speed was without precedent, the result of global collaboration and relentless innovation. Across Tokyo, rumors spread. Some swore the Mustang carried secret armor or a new supercharger. Others whispered of American pilots possessed by unbreakable spirit, a force blending machine and man, power and hope, beyond anything the Empire could answer. Little by little, strategy focused not on triumph but on survival. Historians and technical experts have since peeled back the layers of that day's miracle. The P-51 speed, driven by its Merlin engine, could reach nearly 440 miles per hour. It was crafted with a two-stage supercharger that allowed it to maintain high power, even as altitude drained the life from rival engines. Its frame was lighter, its fuel capacity vaster, thanks to drop tanks designed for extended operations. The Mustang was the ace maker, a reputation built not only on its statistics, but its uncanny ability to survive and strike back. But numbers alone cannot explain the impact of that climb. When the Mustang soared above Tokyo, it was a lightning strike against pride, a demonstration that technology combined with will could change the course of war. Children in shelters drew the enemy plane on scraps. Pilots stitched Mustang silhouettes onto handkerchiefs, awaiting the next fateful sortie. The Mustang was no longer just a foreign threat. It was an omen. This would not be the last time a wounded Mustang made history. Throughout the Pacific, similar tales echoed, each one amplifying the legend. "It flies like it cannot be killed," one Japanese pilot whispered after his own defeat. And so, as the crippled P-51 outclimbed Japan's best twice in a single battle, a new world was born in the air above Tokyo, a world where prophecy took the form of daring, invention, and endurance. This was the start of a chapter that would upend all expectations, filling both enemies and allies with equal portions of fear and hope. The Mustang's climb was not only a maneuver, but a message. When all seems lost and fate burns against you, rise. Rise again, defiant against despair, higher than anyone thought possible. The roar of engines split the fragile quiet over Tokyo. After the Mustang's first shocking climb, a wave of disbelief rippled across both the embattled city and its defenders in the sky. Japanese pilots had faced adversity before, but never like this. As the battered American craft looped and wove upward through thickening clouds, all eyes watched the most improbable duel of the Pacific War erupt over their rooftops. From their command post, officers of the Imperial Japanese Army scrambled to make sense of radio reports. They had trusted the Hayate, seen by many as the apex predator of Japan's aerial arsenal, to bring down any American fighter that dared to limp into their territory. The Ki-84 Hayate could climb sharply, outmaneuvering Allied planes in vertical contests and boasting a top speed near 400 miles per hour. Yet now their finest machine gave chase and still, inexplicably fell behind. The Mitsubishi J2M Raiden, another formidable climber, designed specifically to intercept the mighty B-29 bombers, spiraled higher with steel resolve, its pilots confident in their craft's vertical prowess. But the Mustang, riddled with bullets and trailing a plume of dark smoke, surged vertically once again. Japanese pilots struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing, a severely damaged adversary, outclimbing them not once, but for the second time, as if fate itself was rewriting the script of battle. Inside the Mustang, the American pilot's world shrank to the battered cockpit. Oil pressure dipped. Alarms flickered. He gripped the throttle, fighting both gravity and despair. At these extremes, survival was not just aeronautical. It was deeply personal, and every decision marked the razor edge between oblivion and immortality. The clash became a chase, and then an aerial ballet. Japanese ground crew peered through binoculars, tracking their squads and praying for redemption. Radios echoed frantic orders. Intercept! Cut him off! He must not escape. For every Japanese ace in pursuit, there was a corresponding sense of awe. How could an enemy plane so gravely wounded refuse to surrender, daring their best to a contest it should not win? On the ground, Tokyo's citizens huddled in fear and fascination. Children sketched the outline of the Mustang against the sky, mythologizing the encounter as it unfolded. The duel overhead was more than a tactical skirmish. It was a revelation, shaking the foundations of doctrine and pride alike. Technical specifics only deepened the mystery. The Mustang's Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine delivered 695 horsepower and functioned at high altitude thanks to an innovative two-stage supercharger design. This singular advantage allowed the P-51 to keep climbing, even as fuel ran low and pressure mounted. Japanese fighters, by contrast, were crafted for agility and climb, but their engines struggled at extreme heights and under battle stress. In theory, the Hayate and Raiden could match any American machine in vertical flight, but reality had other plans. The first climb was shocking. The second was devastating. As the Mustang rocketed upward again, Japanese aces recalibrated. The legendary Nakajima Ki-84 soon found itself in a contest of pride, forced to rely on sheer skill and heart as technical superiority slipped from their grasp. The sky, once their domain, was now a place of humiliation and uncertainty. Allied air crews would later deconstruct the event in tense briefings. The Mustang's resilience, its capacity to soak up punishment and retaliate with sheer will, only solidified its legend. Stories spread across the Pacific, giving hope to embattled and exhausted squadrons everywhere. For the Japanese, the clash above Tokyo was an omen. It warned of an enemy who could endure, adapt, and innovate at pace. In the barracks and briefing rooms, officers debated and pored over diagrams. What had gone wrong? Was there something uncanny, a secret American tactic or a miraculous mechanical quirk, beyond the reach of their best minds? Back in the Mustang's cockpit, the pilot fought on. He balanced between calculation and instinct, banking for altitude, scanning for threats. The battered airframe creaked but did not fail. With every second spent outclimbing his adversaries, the odds of survival and victory, both personal and strategic, inched higher. The second climb ended with stunned silence. Japanese raiders, starved for answers, returned to base shaken, confronting a new nightmare. Their best had been defeated twice by a wounded adversary who simply refused to die. The myth of air superiority above Japan was shattered. Defeat had taken a new, humiliating form. This encounter would ripple through generations, through memoirs, technical reports, and whispered stories. A single battle above Tokyo shifted the balance, exposing the raw power of Allied innovation and spirit. And so, the clash above Tokyo was more than a duel. It was a warning and an invitation to reconsider everything. For both pilots spiraling through the exhausted air, and for nations locked in war, it marked the arrival of a new kind of legend, a legend born not in victory alone, but through miraculous survival and the relentless quest to rise again, even when battered and barely holding together. The moment the Mustang disappeared into the clouds, higher than any wounded machine had the right to climb, the shattered silence in the Japanese communications tent boiled over into chaos and disbelief. Officers barked demands for explanations, desperate to salvage pride and credibility, while every man who had witnessed the duel above Tokyo struggled to reconcile what they'd seen with every lesson they'd ever learned about air combat and mechanical limits. For the most skilled pilots of the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy, those who had once held the title of ace, the events of the morning felt like a calling, not only to defend their homeland, but to confront a new reality in the air. At squadron briefings, the story spread like wildfire. Veteran pilots, men hardened by years of brutal fighting over China, Burma, and the Pacific, replayed the day's encounter in pained detail. The question ricocheted around bunker walls and crowded airfields. How could a beaten, smoke-laced Mustang twice outpace the best of the Hayate and the Raiden? Their frames were lighter, their wings sharper, their pilots handpicked from the fiercest survivors of the Empire's worst days. Yet now, shame mingled with awe as they gathered for a new briefing. Some cursed the outcome under their breath. Others stood in silent contemplation, eyes downcast as if facing an ancestral reckoning. Major Katsuhiro Saito, a legend among Zero and Hayate pilots, addressed his flight. His voice was gravel, hardened by loss and stripped of the arrogance that once animated so many of his colleagues. "We must be ready for anything," he confessed. "Even the impossible, even the broken enemy defying death in our sky." For Saito and his comrades, the realization that the rules of combat could be so spectacularly overturned was both terrifying and strangely inspiring. If a Mustang so battered could perform such a feat, then what might unscathed American machines achieve? The pilots gathered in pubs and mess halls after flights, huddled over weak beer and bowls of noodles, dissecting every maneuver, every dive, and every miraculous climb. Some insisted there was a secret, an undiscovered American fuel, a mechanical genius hidden beneath the Mustang's silver cowling. Others, more shaken, spoke in hushed disbelief. Maybe it was only spirit, that indefinable thing the Americans called guts. Some cast their minds toward ancient texts and omens. Was this duel above Tokyo a sign from ancestors or the gods? The youngest pilots, the replacement boys sent up after only a few dozen hours in the cockpit, felt the weight of the story most. For them, the legend of the invincible Mustang became a living nightmare. The whispers that the Americans had managed to call lightning from the sky became more frightening than any technical specification. Fear spread among green pilots already short on confidence, compounding an exhaustion brought on by relentless raids and the growing certainty that defeat was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, Japan's celebrated aces took the Mustang's triumph personally. These were men who had survived Guadalcanal, Rabaul, Iwo Jima, men who had until now believed that their victory could be engineered by the sharpness of their swords and the will of their ancestors. They doubled their training flights, experimenting with new maneuvers. They flew straight at the limits of their machine's endurance, risking everything for even a fragment of advantage. Yet time was against them, And so too was Japan's shrinking pool of resources. Fuel and spare parts had become rarities, barely sufficient to let squadrons train, let alone fight at peak efficiency. Many top Japanese pilots reported that their fighters, especially the Ki-84s, could rarely operate with the high-octane fuel required for maximum performance. Detonations rattled engines. Vital metals went unreplaced. Radio coordination between squadrons frequently failed, rendering intricate tactics useless, as the Mustangs exploited every lapse with deadly precision. It was not just machines that failed. It was hope. Reports arriving from the front lines and from the ruins of Tokyo painted a grim picture. If these fighters can reach Tokyo, no target in Japan is safe, one shocked ace wrote in his diary. The dreaded sight of Mustangs slashing down from the clouds, their speed, their unswerving aim, their refusal to die, became a waking terror for all who faced them. In the following weeks, the Japanese command attempted to control the narrative. Propaganda posters praised the bravery of their own aces, boasting of victories and technological advances. But among the actual pilots, skepticism grew. The sudden surge in losses, the empty bunks at night, the faces missing from morning roll call, all were reminders that the day above Tokyo marked something irrevocable. Still, courage did not wane. In the face of fear, the aces of the Empire rallied themselves in the only way they knew how: the vow to challenge the Mustang, to not allow despair to take hold, to protect their home even if the world had changed overnight. "We will meet them again," Saito promised, "and if they climb, we will follow even if it means chasing ghosts." As for the young and the inexperienced, a new kind of resolve grew inside those who survived their first encounters. They patched planes, practiced with makeshift training gear, and clung to ritual and luck. If fate decreed that the Mustangs could not fall, then the warriors of the rising sun would not yield either. Not in Tokyo, not in the sky, not until destiny's verdict was final. And so, the legend of that day spiraled outwards, infecting every corner of Japan's fighting heart. What began as a single duel became a crucible of courage and loss. For aces and rookies alike, the Mustang was not just a machine, it was a question. How do you fight what you cannot defeat? How do you rise when the world itself seems to have learned to climb faster, higher, and with more hope than you can bear? In the aftermath of the Mustang's incredible duel, stunned Japanese engineers and command staff pored over every scrap of intelligence they could gather. How could a battered American fighter outperform their best, not just in firepower or speed, but in sheer resilience and improbable vertical escape? The question ricocheted through workshops and war rooms, challenging not just pilots, but the very engineers and designers whose reputations and hopes had been pinned to the Hayate. Raiden and the legendary Zero, the heart of the P-51 Mustang, beat to a different rhythm. Fitted with the American Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it represented the apex of Allied technical and industrial collaboration. Unlike earlier Allied fighters, which lost strength and vital power with climbing altitude, the Mustang's two-stage, two-speed supercharger allowed it to gulp enough air for its 1,095 horsepower to deliver full power even in thinner air. This was the crucial edge that, when everything else failed, allowed the Mustang to rise higher and faster. Even when battered and running on little more than determination and fumes, Japanese technical teams investigated downed Mustangs and attempted to match the advances. The Nakajima Ki-84 Frank was their closest answer, equipped with a powerful engine and built for agile turning and rapid climbs. On paper, the Ki-84 could hold its own at lower altitudes, yet reality was less forgiving and far more ominous. Japanese fuel shortages and inferior oil meant these high-performance engines often underperformed, detonating or failing under stress. The Raiden, created entirely as a B-29 interceptor, could climb fast but proved unreliable, especially at high altitude or when sustaining damage. Meanwhile, American manufacturing fed the war machine with relentless efficiency. Mustang airframes flowed from Detroit and Inglewood, each built with modular techniques that streamlined production but maintained military resilience. The Mustang was forged from the lessons of earlier defeats, the need for range, speed, high-altitude ability, and especially survivability. Self-sealing fuel tanks, heavier armament, And radios that rarely failed meant the P-51 not only outflew adversaries, it outlived them. Japanese engineers dismantled crashed Mustangs, their hands trembling over unfamiliar alloys and tightly packed components. How could a fighter sustain such punishment and keep fighting? They made notes, they drew sketches. But the Mustang's genius lay not in one revolutionary feature, but in the symphony of many. The laminar flow wing that cut drag dramatically, the powerful Merlin, the lightweight but robust body, and drop tanks that allowed it to range deep across enemy territory. It was a holistic triumph. For Imperial commanders, the truth stung sharply. Their own production lines were now plagued by scarcity. Aluminum was swapped for inferior metals. Rubber was recycled from old tires. Precious fuel and rare oils were rationed. Even when a fighter rolled out of the factory, there was no guarantee it would fly with the bite and resilience its blueprints promised. Enemy raids, too, now targeted airfields and factories, compounding the struggle. Still, Japanese innovation was not without merit. Teams developed last hope upgrades, from field-fitted turbochargers to attempts at weight reduction by stripping armament or even radios. Test pilots, often aces risking life and limb, flew experimental sorties chasing the ghost of the climbing Mustang, always just out of reach. But war's cruel arithmetic does not favor hope alone. Superiority, once measured in pure skill, now lived and died at the intersection of science, industry, and logistics. Mustang engineers, for their part, never rested. Each report of battlefield damage was painstakingly analyzed, and improvements were implemented rapidly. Bulletproof windscreens became standard. Armament was adjusted for optimal fire rates. Even cockpit ergonomics were studied to reduce stress and increase the pilot's effectiveness under pressure. The Mustang's evolution mirrored the relentless march of the Allied war machine. Agile, optimistic, learning at dizzying pace. On Japanese radio, the ministry desperately broadcast stories of homegrown victories, reminding citizens that the Empire's fighters were the sharpest swords in Asia. But pilots knew the truth. They whispered about the Mustang's machine spirit, a mix of advanced engineering and something almost supernatural, the ability to survive impossible odds, to climb from death's door one more time. In Allied briefings, the tone was different, proud but sobered by loss. Even as American bombers and fighters ravaged Japanese cities, every pilot understood he was taking part in a new kind of warfare, one of rapid innovation, ceaseless industrial might, and the cold arithmetic of attrition. Mustang pilots, returning from missions with oil-specked goggles and trembling hands, spoke with awe of their machine's ability to turn the tables, to cheat fate, to bring them home. As the sun set over a battered Tokyo, the Mustang stood taller than any plane had before. It was the child of necessity and ingenuity, proof that under impossible odds, human minds could re-engineer fate itself. Yet for every miracle in the West, there was a heartbreak in the East. The Japanese defenders, racked with doubt but not dashed of courage, still clung to every scrap of hope, every new design, for every whisper that someday the tables would turn again. But the gap widened day by day. Logistics, science, bravery, and defeat, all locked in desperate embrace. In that summer of fire and steel, engineering had become prophecy, and the Mustang was its sword. The story of the crippled Mustang's defiance roared through Tokyo before the flames of battle even cooled. In the aftermath of its second miraculous climb, rumors spread like wildfire in the barracks, on the factory floor, among the city's battered civilians, and the haunted eyes of Japan's airmen. The Mustang was no longer just a plane. It was now an omen, an echo of prophecy, a symbol of fate rewriting the odds beneath burning skies. In the crowded bunkers and mess halls, pilots traded stories, embellishing every detail. Some swore the American machine had been repaired by genius engineers who wielded tools as if they were magic, crafting resilience out of scrap and prayer. Others whispered that the pilot who flew it had been marked by the gods, as if their ancestors themselves guided his trembling hands upward against gravity and despair. Commanders, desperate to restore morale, issued fresh propaganda. Pamphlets describing new anti-Mustang tactics flowed into squadrons. Posters depicted the Hayate and Raiden in glorious duels, always triumphant against the foreign invader. In reality, unease grew with every new order. More aces failed to return. The gaps in roll calls became statistics that could not be massaged or ignored. The prophecy of defeat, once unthinkable, began to hover over the Imperial Air Forces. Among the rank and file, the Mustang's legend blended truth and myth. In bombed-out tenements, children drew pictures of the silver fighter with wings ablaze. Mechanics, patching shattered Hayates late into the night, recited tales of American engine wizardry over mugs of bitter tea. "That Mustang is not of this world," one old sergeant insisted. "No plane can climb so high, not with so many wounds." His listeners nodded, dread growing in their silent hearts. Fears took on new and old forms. Some believed the Mustang was a ghost. Death returned in metal form, unable to fall. Others muttered about secret American fuel or whispered that the invaders had harnessed the spirits of the Pacific. Rituals multiplied. Pilots carried talismans. Some prayed in hidden shrines before dawn missions. Yet each return became a new chapter in the growing prophecy. The Mustang refused to die, and every climb foretold a further fracturing of Japanese dreams. The officers in charge of intelligence mapped encounters, trying to make sense of the new air war's mathematics. By summer 1945, American air power hovered over Japan in an endless, grinding haze. 64 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed on the ground by Mustang raids, with another 180 crippled Webb. In the skies, dogfights occurred less often than ground attacks, but every clash became a trial of willpower for both sides. Reports of P-51 pilots facing intense anti-aircraft fire, barrage balloons and desperate fighter intercepts filtered back, each survival inspiring fresh rumors and stories about American invincibility. Some voices tried to break the growing fatalism. Veteran pilots scarred by loss swore vengeance. "If the Mustang is a spirit, then let us summon our own," Captain Saito declared, dispatching his squadron with ancestral prayers. Engineers, still searching for answers, experimented with risky upgrades and last-minute repairs. Hope hung by a thread strung between tradition and innovation. Meanwhile, news of Mustang triumphs traveled the Pacific. Allied pilots spoke in reverent tones of the Tokyo miracle, describing the climbs as symbols of American industry and courage. Technical briefings emphasized the Merlin engine's prowess, the laminar flow wings' drag reduction, and the deadly symphony of American mass production. From April to June 1945, P-51 pilots destroyed more than 1,000 enemy planes and ships, wrecked buildings and railways, and changed the course of the conflict web. For every American loss, a chorus of new legends echoed in cockpits. The Mustang always finds a way. The Japanese home front, battered by air raids, felt the prophecy's weight in every siren and every child's cry. Cities leveled, dreams scattered, yet still hope flickered. Some civilians hung origami cranes for luck, others whispered prayers for the return of their sons. All carried in their hearts the strange unease that the Mustang's climbs had marked a new age. Historians would later describe these months as Japan's final curtain. In the air, an era where spirit and reality collided, where rumors became prophecy, and a single machine could redefine courage for millions. They chronicled tales of failed defenses, daring last stands, and the dreams of a nation in twilight. The Mustang's climbs and the stories they spawned became a measure of hope and terror. For every Japanese pilot who survived the encounter, the memory would never fade. The battered craft, wounded yet unbroken, soaring twice into legend. For the Allied pilots flying over Tokyo, each victory felt like an answer to prayers and the echo of an inevitable future. In the shadow of these climbs, the world prepared for the next chapter, one where prophecy would not fade but grow clearer with every sunrise. The Mustang's first majestic ascent had left Tokyo breathless, its defenders humbled and its pilots pondering the limits of man and machine. Yet fate, unpredictable as the Pacific winds, was not content with a single miracle. Morning had scarcely matured when gunfire stuttered in the sky once more, and the battered silver fighter, still trailing scars from the first encounter, was forced into a second duel for survival. The Japanese Air Command, desperate to reclaim shattered pride and restore their skies, dispatched a squadron of Ki-84 Hayates and J-2M Raidens with the singular aim: confront the Mustang again, and this time ensure its destruction. Lessons from the earlier dogfight were fresh in every mind. The young pilots, fueled by caffeine and honor, launched with renewed precision, determined to prove that Japan's best could not be twice outdone. The Mustang's pilot, still grappling with a failing engine and dwindling ammunition, felt the chase before he saw it. Oil pressure needles danced on the edge of catastrophe. Oxygen hissed through cracked seals. Revenge-scorched contrails streaked overhead. Yet instead of running, the Mustang dove briefly, then snapped upward at an astonishing angle, its propeller carving hope from desperation. Below, mechanics and staff officers gathered outside hangars and bunkers, witnessing the encore no one had dared predict. Witnesses swore later that the battered Mustang faltered, dipped perilously close to stalling, then, against physics and luck, recovered and soared. It seemed to cheat gravity, wringing every ounce of energy from its triumphant Merlin engine and laminar flow wings. Japanese aces pressed their advantage, crowding their formations tight. The Hayate was engineered for optimal climb at low to medium altitudes, powered by a Nakajima engine, burning expensive, precious, high-octane fuel, though by 1945 many flew on inferior substitutes. The Raiden, created especially for vertical interception, joined the chase in a ballet of skill and engineering. But every maneuver was mirrored, then bettered as the Mustang, crippled yet transcendent, defied expectation and defeat. The second climb ignited chaos on the ground. Radios bellowed, relaying news of the impossible, as Allied and Axis observers strained against the possibility that legend was eclipsing reality. Every Tokyo citizen who remembered the previous climb drew breath as the silver fighter clawed past the clouds, the battered machine growing smaller but immeasurably brighter in their collective memory. For the Japanese pursuers, frustration bloomed into awe and fear. Technical officers scribbled reports by flashlight, frantic to capture some explanation. "Is it the Merlin?" asked one mechanic. "Is it American fuel?" Others blamed luck, machine spirit, or that elusive quality called guts. But in the cockpit, the answers mattered less than the next moment. Mustang and pilot were now a single force, locked in climb and hope. The second duel was savagely close. The Raiden closed the gap at high altitude, but its engine, starved for oxygen and laboring with battlefield damage, began to sputter. The Hayate joined, circling with desperate intent. Both Japanese fighters fired bursts that peppered the Mustang's wings, tearing holes that should have crippled flight. Yet the American pilot, sweat and blood stinging his eyes, coaxed every last bit of performance from his craft. One last climb, one final miracle, lifted him clear of danger. Eyewitnesses recalled seeing the Mustang shiver and tip, nearly falling from the sky, only to straighten and press skyward again. As pursuit faded, the battered plane continued its ascent, a testament to Allied engineering, spirit, and will. By the time the Japanese fighters broke off, the Mustang, twice wounded, twice ascendant, had redefined courage for all who saw it. In the aftermath, the Mustang limped home, trailing ruined metal and fuel. Ground crews received the pilot with disbelieving cheers. The battered fighter was assessed, its wounds catalogued. Each technician marveled at the engine's resilience, the airframe's durability, and the pilot's refusal to quit. Meanwhile, news of the second climb spread through Tokyo and beyond, taking shape as legend, not only among allies but among enemies who had witnessed the impossible. Imperial Japanese Command, rattled to its core, began issuing new directives. Aircraft designers were pressed to uncover any path toward parity. New high-altitude interceptors were sketched and old doctrines revised, but hope of matching the Mustang began to fade. The best efforts of the Empire could not answer the simple, brutal fact. Twice in one day, their best had failed to bring down one battered adversary. Twice in one day, the Americans had climbed not only into the sky but into the world's imagination. For Allied strategy, the second climb was confirmation. The Mustang's triumph and survival proved that technology could rewrite the rules of war, and that ingenuity paired with will could survive against all odds. Pilots debriefed, tactics were refined, every flight saw new hope, every mission planned with the memory of Tokyo's duels burning bright. Back in the bunkers and briefing rooms, veteran Japanese pilots wrapped lucky handkerchiefs around their wrists, murmuring prayers to ancestors, and now to the Mustang, which had become both a nightmare and a prophecy, and so the battered Mustang, its tail carved across Tokyo's scarred sky, settled into legend. Its pilot, haunted but alive, became the symbol of a new era, a time when even defeat could yield miracles. And every climb made by a battered plane was a small victory over despair. The second climb changed everything. In its wake, the balance shifted toward hope. And as nightfall claimed Tokyo, those who had witnessed it knew. The future would belong to those brave enough to rise again, no matter how many wounds they carried. With Japan surrendered and cities scarred, the echoes of the Mustang's miracle climbs lingered, etched not just in the battered earth, but far above, in the memory of every pilot who ever gazed up in hope or dread. The story was recounted at every airfield from Okinawa to Iwo Jima, in tent briefings and victory celebrations, and later in hushed voices among those rebuilding a broken nation. The Mustang's ascent was no longer just American legend. It became a universal lesson about the power of innovation, spirit, and the indomitable urge to rise. For American veterans, the P-51 Mustang became an enduring symbol. Its silhouette adorned medals, museum displays, and later air shows, where young eyes watched the old warbirds carve the sky and felt a distant pulse of inherited pride. Pilots recalled the feverish tension of Tokyo raids, the blood pounding in their ears when battered engines refused to quit, the bittersweet sight of fellow flyers lost to crackling enemy flak or dogfights with defenders who, despite everything, never gave up. The Mustang's legacy shaped air strategy for decades. The U.S. Air Force adopted lessons learned over Japan, the critical importance of long-range fighters, robust engines, and adaptability in the cockpit. Instructors taught new generations about the value of creative tactics and relentless training, reminding every recruit that much of war is decided by what happens in the moment when despair and hope clash head-on. For Japan, too, the lessons held meaning. In defeat, engineers and pilots rebuilt, drawing inspiration not only from their own tradition of fierce spirit, but from the adaptability and technical brilliance epitomized by Mustang victories. The empire's aviation industry, once devastated, was later reborn. Japanese engineers would go on to create commercial airliners and advanced technology, merging honor with innovation. In the Pacific, those Mustang climbs became the framework for a new mythology. Children, orphaned by war but hungry for heroism, listened to stories about the climbs above Tokyo with wide eyes. Some became pilots, fueled by a longing to match the courage of those who refused to surrender. Others became engineers, determined to unlock the secrets of machines that could climb even when battered and broken. The Mustang itself survived. It flew in Korea, appeared in movies, and remains, decades later, one of the most celebrated fighter planes in history. Its lines are immortal, a symbol of an age when humanity's spirit and mechanical genius collided at the highest altitudes. Museums across Japan and America display the remnants of these legendary machines, showing generations the price and glory of determination in desperate times. Historians dissect the raw numbers, thousands of missions, hundreds of victories, dozens of losses. But the true legacy flickers in the stories, lives touched, courage tested, and two nations forever altered by a handful of harrowing dogfights above an ancient capital. The Mustang's climbs are a testament not to invincibility, but to resilience. Not to easy victory, but to the will to keep rising. The pilots who survived, American, Japanese, and otherwise, carried nightmares and dreams into peacetime. Some spoke openly of the duels. Others buried those memories trying to build new lives from ashes. Yet in every retelling, the moment remains vivid. The Mustang, battered but climbing, outpacing impossible odds, and the world watching, hearts lifted or broken. Peace brought reconciliation. Pilots met in later years, eyes crinkled and bones aching, sharing tales of mercy, ferocity, and the strange, sacred beauty of the sky. Children born in post-war Tokyo sometimes traced the Mustang's path in summer. Clouds repeating stories handed down by grandparents who remembered fire, ruin, and awe. Legacy is not only technical. The Mustang's triumph redefined air warfare, making strategic bombing possible, forcing innovation, and showing that industry and intellect often outweigh brute courage. Webb. Its climbs in 1945 changed how Eastern and Western militaries approached every challenge. Futurists and tacticians study those missions to this day, debating the tactics and spirit, knowing that technology alone does not win, nor does bravery, without the union of both. In Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, the scars heal slowly. Yet the lessons remain. The Mustang's story is retold in novels, documentaries, and the hush before dawn when old men remember a silver shape climbing where no one believed it could rise. The city, once leveled by raids, now pulses with life, carrying the legacy of that fateful duel above the clouds. In every nation scarred by war, hope returns slowly. The Mustang's legacy teaches that loss need not be final, that endurance and ingenuity can lift us all toward healing. The battered plane's climb over Tokyo is now prophecy transformed, a promise that, even when broken, we can rise again. And so, from the embers of destruction and the silence that follows guns, the legend endures. In every climb, every engine's whine, every wide-eyed child staring upward, the Mustang's spirit soars. The sky, once a battlefield of death and dreams, is now the birthplace of renewal. In the end, what remains is not just the memory of victory, but the lesson of struggle, that true greatness is found in the will to rise. Above Tokyo in 1945, a crippled Mustang reached for the clouds, and the world learned to hope once more. The echoes of the Mustang's audacious assaults reverberated through Japan long after its engines had faded from the sky. By the waning months of 1945, Tokyo's defenders saw their world transformed. The skies they once ruled had become relentlessly hostile, painted with contrails of American fighters that swooped in and out with ruthless regularity. The Mustang hadn't just proved its superiority in spectacular climbs, it shattered the Empire's spirit, disrupted doctrine, and forced a reconsideration of everything that once felt certain. As summer deepened, the Imperial Command scrambled to adapt. Orders pulsed through radio static, demanding new tactics and improvisations against repeated Mustang raids. Squadron leaders who once taught younger pilots to trust in their Hayates now counseled caution, even avoidance. The fear of an encounter with the Mustang seeped into every aspect of operations, from hurried briefings to exhausted maintenance crews patching battered airframes with salvaged parts. Every sortie carried the memory of the day their best were left behind, unable to match the enemy's climb or endurance. Strategically, Japan's losses were catastrophic. The P-51's ground attack missions devastated airfields, destroying hundreds of Japanese planes before they ever lifted off Webb. The feverish construction of new aircraft and defenses, attempts to relocate factories, and even ritualistic prayers performed at dawn could not stem the American tide. Allied victory in the air meant that by July, Mustang pilots encountered fewer enemy fighters at altitude. Japanese aircraft were held in reserve, their fate tied to one desperate last stand against the anticipated invasion fleet. Instead, the Mustangs hunted on the ground, bombing, strafing, and burning, until airfields became graveyards. In crowded barracks and bunkers, loss became a daily companion. Young pilots joined their units, buoyed by tales of ancestral valor, but sobered by stories of the Mustang's climbs. Mission after mission was dispatched with hope, but returned with fewer men. For every victory claimed in propaganda posters, the reality painted a different portrait. The web of rumors and prophecy spun tighter. The Mustang was everywhere, impossible to defeat, an omen of the inevitable. Meanwhile, civilian life unraveled. Raids forced evacuations. Cities were burned to ash. Families mourned loved ones lost in skies darkened by American machines. Children recited the Mustang's legend, their drawings a mix of awe and fear. The relentless impact of the air war reached deep into the empire, changing not just the military's fortunes, but the psyche of an entire generation. In the mess halls, surviving aces told stories of their encounters. For some, the shame of defeat was unbearable. For others, the Mustang became an almost sacred adversary. Pilots honored those who fell chasing its contrails, believing that to rise and meet the Mustang was the purest test of warrior spirit. No amount of technical innovation or prayer could erase the new reality. American airmen owned the skies, and the Empire's best were forced to defend at ever lower odds. The technical officers, relentlessly searching for answers, catalogued every loss and attributed it to longer American range, better communication, and superior engine management. Reports poured in. Engines detonating from poor fuel, armaments freezing, radio failures at crucial junctures. The Mustang's regimen of never-ending adaptation starkly contrasted with Japan's gradual stagnation, deprived of vital resources, ever more improvisational. On a strategic scale, the Mustang's raids choked the Empire's ability to coordinate defense. Bombed railways crippled logistics. Destroyed ships turned coastal supply runs into suicide missions. The American fighters operated with impunity, each mission rewriting the formula for survival. 7th Fighter Command and its Mustangs flew 51 ground attack missions, 41 deemed successful, laying waste to more than 1,000 planes, hundreds of ships and innumerable buildings webbed. American losses, while real and tragic, could not compare to the devastation wrought upon a nation already teetering on the edge. Among the Allied ranks, the impact of Mustang mastery was equally profound. Pilots, having survived the crucible of Tokyo, returned home changed forever. The lessons learned over shattered Japanese airfields and cities reshaped tactical doctrine for generations, emphasizing innovation, resilience, and boldness in the face of odds. For Japan, the aftermath was both practical and spiritual. The war's end became a question not only of territory or resources, but of pride and identity. Those who endured the Mustang's wrath rebuilt their lives on new foundations, forever marked by the memory of the day the world learned to rise higher than despair. In the final days, as surrender approached and the empire of the rising sun faded, the legend of the climber from Tokyo remained. The battered Mustang's triumph became a lesson, one understood in every rebuilt village, every child's drawing, every survivor's story. Defeat could breed humility, innovation, and the seed of future hope. Even the vanquished learned from the Mustang's resolve, striving to harness the same spirit in peacetime. The echoes of those soaring duels carried across decades remind us that the sky belongs not only to conquerors, but to the persistent. Night fell on Japan. The Mustang's contrails lingered, traces of prophecy in a sky ready for renewal. If you've stood with us through the thunder of history, you know there's always more beneath the surface. Hit subscribe now and ring the bell, because every story of war, courage, and consequence deserves to be told. Join our ranks, dive deep into the untold battles, and become part of the mission to remember. Your next chapter starts here.